I will begin this section with an image of geese flying overhead. As you can see, they are coordinated. They are coordinated consensually, sensing the world together. Even as my grandchildren here are consensual in their picking of blueberries. They didn't have to talk about or consent. They just simply coordinated the doing together. And that is the basis for language. It's grounded in consensual coordination. Consensual coordination that is persistent long enough for there to be a possibility of a second coordination on top of that. It becomes present so that you can have a coordination of the coordination. I will call this a signifying configuration. There isn't a proper name for it because we haven't yet come to the point of naming. To have naming, we need to do yet another coordination on top of that coordinating to distinguish a name that which we have already done, that which we have already coordinated our coordinations. And then we end up with something, a thing, an event, an action, or anything of that nature. Inherent in this, there was a coordination of a coordination of a coordination, all consensual. But once we have the name, all of that has disappeared, and the object that we have named persists, and we may take it as given. It really is there. And we can also take that name then and take it to a new domain of operations and doing and accept it as a name there. And when we've done that, that name in a new coordination domain, a new field, a new set of activities can be coordinated on again to result in yet a new name. And this we can do over and over again, taking those new names into different places, different action lineages, and give it a new name, another name. So as each one is accepted, it becomes the ground for further consensual coordination. What you end up with is kind of a lineage, a distinction of it. Take, for example, the word systemic that I heard used in the conference many different ways. It can be imported into a different domain of doings, and then it's no longer quite the same idea, and yet another. So the distinctions take on a meaning according to how they coordinate the actions in a particular domain to which that distinction pertains. So you kind of end up with different lineages of ideas and names according to the domain in which that distinction is operationally used. All of them become the seed for a new lineage of further distinctions, and that's why I have this diagram drawn with the proliferation of ideas, new words, new ideas. Operationally, it doesn't matter how many prior distinctions have been absorbed in any name. We really don't need to know that. And in fact, it's very difficult to trace because a process or history is lost once we have accepted the name and using it. This is true even for what I'm saying now. Every word that I'm saying has some kind of history, and we don't necessarily know where it came from. There's another thing about distinctions. When we make a distinction, we cleave a this and a that, and a kind of, this is what we're meaning, but that's not what we're meaning. And inherently, implicitly, the domain in which this distinction is valid arises along with the distinction. This is both true in the case when we're creating a new distinction or when we're speaking of it. We easily navigate into the domain which distinction is valid and hear it appropriately. Or when we don't, that's where we often end up in disagreements because we don't realize that we are in different domains. So every distinction evokes the domain and obscures other domains. We are always really only present in the domain in which we are present. We may have a vague feeling of other possibilities, and probably that's very important. And part of this point about ambiguity, to remain aware that there are other possibilities. But there's a value to this. When you obscure other domains, you're reducing dimensionality. And that's not always a bad thing. This artwork by Noble and Webster is a good indication of what may happen. This looks very chaotic, but if you flatten it, as the shadow does, into a particular dimensionality, you reduce the complexity and you create a simplification, which in terms of our operation language affords us meaning for that particular operation. Take, for example, this set of images from a data set. This is all the same data. Is it 2 things? Is it 3 things? Aha, well, we could contest that. No, it's actually 4. Oh yes, it is 4, but they're arranged as a square, not as a linear set of functions. And it's only if we have the capacity to view this apparently different set of data from yet a third perspective, a dimensionality, as in this graphing calculator, that we start to understand something else. I think this is analogous to our living as living beings in the landscape. We have the heritage of a systemic cognition that has evolved as we, as living beings, in our heritage of evolution, have learned to navigate through landscapes. So we compose the dimensionality through the dynamic process of changing perspectives. So no single view of such a landscape could provide you with the dimensionality. It is composed from the actual moving through it. The selection is flat. It's the lived experience that gives dimensionality. And so it would be with the elephant. It's only the lived experience of the whole set of domains in which these different views might be appropriate that can generate the landscape of elephant. And in the much simpler of these examples, with the data set. So when we do this, we compose unified whole through our experience of participating in the dimensional dynamic. And then we create an explanation. We create new distinctions. And in this case, the new distinction was a 3D frame in which we can have the notion of a 3-dimensional view such that the diverse views make sense to us. And this too doesn't make it reality. It's just a way for us to make sense of the diversity. But we accept it as a reference and treat it as if real. So, based on all this, I can come to the conclusion that language too can be viewed as a fundamental enabling constraint. It enables us to act coherently together, and it constrains all the different possible ways we could have acted by simplifying and directing us.